There are stories we inherit, stories we invent, and stories we choose. And there are stories that sit quietly in the corner of history, waiting for someone to turn on the light. This is one of those stories. It's a story of one old man who had the courage and conviction to break the silence that protected one of the nation's most cherished myths, the unquestioned masculinity of the few who defended Britain in its darkest hour. So here's the scene. It's Sunday evening, 18th of May 1997, and most Britons are settled on their sofas. There's a documentary scheduled for 9:20 on BBC Two. The title, It's Not Unusual, A Lesbian and Gay History, sounds a bit niche, but there wasn't a lot to choose from in those days. It starts fairly tamely. A few talking heads reminding us we didn't talk much about sex in those days. Then, 6 minutes in, things start to get more interesting. We're introduced to Chris Gotch, who offers his recollection of a life as a public schoolboy in the years between the two world wars. Well-worn stories of schoolboy crushes, naked bathing and mutual masturbation. The usual stuff. Nothing too serious. So far, so familiar. But to really get what's coming, you need to understand how this guy presents himself on screen. He looks and speaks like a retired barrister, though in truth he'd been an architect. And you can imagine he ironed his shirt for the interview, even though no one actually asked him to. No piercings, no tats, no visible signs of him being a loaded gun. By the middle of the program, the focus turns to the Second World War and back to Chris. With the clarity of someone delivering the weather report, his attention turns to his service as a fighter pilot and a romantic encounter with a fellow airman stationed at an RAF base in the middle of England. With just the hint of a smile on his face and as calm as you like, he says, "He was the first bloke who ever buggered me, and it went extremely well." If ever there was a time for a commercial break. Because the he who did the deed was no anonymous wartime fling or a forgotten name in an old archive. Oh no, he was Wing Commander Ian Gleed, DFC, DSO, CDG, Air Ace, decorated national hero, the handsome, smiling poster boy of Fighter Command. He's the short one in the middle of the photo. Chris Gotch had gently but emphatically stated to the nation, "You don't know the whole story." And that, I think, is what true courage looks like in old age. No chest thumping, no arm pumping, not a roar, but a revelation that turned history upside down. But to fully understand what he had revealed, we have to go back, before the studio, before the cameras, before the script, back to Kettering and a boy named Christopher. Christopher Llewellyn Gotch was born in 1923 into the respectable middle-class rituals of Kettering. His was the kind of family where boys were packed off to a boarding school at a young age to learn the unwritten but universally understood rules on how the world worked. You may touch but not feel. You may explore but not enjoy. And above all, you may indulge, but must never be caught. Those were the rules, and boys being boys, they were quick to explore the possibilities those rules allowed. Naked wrestling, tick. Mutual masturbation, tick. Playful spanking, tick. Buggery was not encouraged, as one might grow to like it. But our Christopher was not every boy. He wanted more than groping in the dark. He wanted affection and intimacy, and he found it with Jimmy, a fellow boarder so beautiful he was known as the house tart, not with malice, but as worship disguised as mockery. The kind of angelic-looking boy that desire followed like a stray dog. They explored their teenage fantasies under blankets and behind hedgerows, and took refuge in hayricks in nearby fields. Sounds like a queer pastoral under English skies. But remember the rules. Indulge, but never get caught. They also shared a dream to become RAF pilots, to fly, to escape into the clouds. Then war made that dream a reality. In 1941, at the age of 17, Chris enlisted with the RAF, training to be a fighter pilot in Canada under the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. He earned his wings before many boys his age had learned to drive. Jimmy would follow soon after, but lacking the agility required to be a pilot, he was posted to Bomber Command. He would die in an air crash a year later, lost to the war before he had the chance to grow into the man he dreamed of becoming. Britain had endured its darkest hour, but the nation was still fighting for its survival when Chris was posted to RAF Middle Wallop in early 1942. Picture him in his uniform, a great mop of blonde hair, a face as smooth as a baby's bottom, and trousers that never quite reached past his ankles. 18 going on 12. His feet had barely hit the ground when he first encountered his wing commander, Ian Widge Gleed. Gleed was everything Gotch was not. Adult, decorated, impossibly confident, a man accustomed to being admired, a man accustomed to being desired. Imagine the scene. Chris is sitting in the officers' mess, reading a newspaper and trying his best to not look like he's snuck in on a schoolboy prank. He has the feeling he's being watched, lowers the paper and sees the wing commander eyeballing him with steely determination. You know that feeling. Oh God, what have I done? Try not to sweat. Try not to look guilty, as you sweat and look guilty. But to his relief, Gleed suddenly makes an exit, leaving Chris to regain his composure. Eventually, cool as he can manage, he makes a casual retreat from the scene of his discomfort to the safety of his quarters. Only, when he opens the door to his room, who should be sitting there looking through his photo album of Canada but Wing Commander Ian Gleed. Gleed doesn't greet him. He doesn't explain. He just leans in and kisses him on the lips. The atmosphere in the room must have been electric. Gleed had crossed the line, and they both knew their destinies had been redrawn without a single word being spoken. So we started having sex, Chris would matter-of-factly announce nearly half a century later. And you know what came next. They became lovers. It wasn't just about sex in the way the world imagines wartime liaisons. They talked, they laughed, they created a rhythm. Gleed would make the invitation in the mess. Chris would slip quietly to his room. The door would be locked. The uniforms would come off. And yes, there was sex. Come on, they were both young. Their affair was reckless, tender, hungry, and profoundly dangerous. Discovery would mean court-martial, disgrace, and possibly prison. But when your life expectancy is measured in weeks, sometimes days, you take your joy where you can find it. Survival and desire often become indistinguishable. Chris remembered the charm, the wit, the seduction of Gleed's world. The drives to London in Gleed's car, dinner in expensive restaurants, the introduction to people like Beverly Nichols, one of the few queer men of the time who lived with a measure of openness. Chris wasn't just being bedded, he was being initiated into the queer world of the 1940s. And London, oh London. 2 young men dressed to kill in their RAF uniforms. And let's face it, they were horny. Desire sharpened by their own sense of mortality, and there was never any shortage of willing admirers. Once, a wealthy American invited them to his suite at the Claridge's Hotel. They weren't going for the high tea. In the morning, as they went their separate ways, he slipped Chris a £5 note, an extravagant amount in wartime Britain. Was he insulted? Not in the least. He couldn't keep the smile off his face as he sang to himself all the way back to the base, "I'm a whore, I'm a whore, I'm a whore." And then war reclaimed them. One night they are torn from their embrace by a loud banging on Gleed's bedroom door. "Group Captain here, Ian. Why is this door locked? Open up." That put a kibosh on their passion. In a panic, Gleed bundles his naked companion into his wardrobe, while he fumbles about trying to buy time and camouflage his own nakedness. Who knows how long the group captain had been standing at the door, but he's obviously on to their game. He insists they review the next day's operational plans, sitting on Gleed's bed, while Chris hides naked and shivering in the wardrobe, desperately hoping he won't sneeze. The message was clear. The walls were closing in. Within weeks, Gleed was quietly posted to HQ Fighter Command. His hubris in pursuing a sexual relationship with a junior ranking officer in plain sight of his commanding officers could not have gone unnoticed. Court-martial was out of the question. He was too valuable, too celebrated, too carefully packaged by the Ministry of Information as the heroic young air ace. But he had become a liability. Removing him was the easiest solution. I'm sure they hoped he'd be more discreet when pursuing his next sexual conquest. But they didn't need to worry for long. 9 months later, he was dead, shot down during combat over Tunisia. Another young life extinguished, another queer life erased. Chris survived. In fact, he thrived. He flew hurricanes, Spitfires, Typhoons, and Mustangs across 4 continents, over 300 missions. He survived 5 plane crashes and was wounded seriously twice. He lost many close friends and at least 2 lovers during those brutal years. And through it all he lived, a queer man hidden by a world that demanded silence. After the war, he married, raised 2 children, built houses, wrote, travelled, drank whiskey generously, and seldom spoke of the young man he had once been. Until 1997. Until he composed himself as he sat before the cameras. Until he decided to reclaim his story, and in doing so, rewrite the definition of bravery. Because bravery isn't just dogfights and medals. It's truth told late, but told anyway. It's an old man lifting the lid off a history that was never as straight as Britain wanted it to be. Here's to you, Christopher Gotch. You changed the story. You made sure we would never forget that queer men fought, flew, fucked, loved and died for this country, just like anyone else.